The mountain air smelled like metal and wind. Fog pushed through the pine trees like smoke, curling around the edge of the landing pad where rotor wash kept the ground in motion. The floodlights cast red across the frost-laced concrete, and the CH-47 Chinooks never stopped cycling. Some were returning empty, some launching into the dark with their belly lights blinking through the haze. The training was called simulated, but it didn't feel that way to anyone watching. The sounds were real. The risks were real. The cold didn't care. Callie stepped off the transport van with her helmet under one arm and a folded diagram tucked into her jacket. No one looked up. The line of personnel at the assignment board barely shifted. Her boots touched the edge of the pad and paused as one Chinook came in low, blades churning hard enough to stagger a crew chief. She watched it touch down with surgical grace, then turned back toward the red-lit board behind the ops tent. There was no ceremony to the names. Each was printed on a laminated strip, slid into a metal groove under their designated crew. Her name was at the bottom, in the smallest handwriting. Callie. Observer only. The last flight rotation. No call sign, no status, just quiet permission to ride along and not interfere. She didn't react. She reached into her flight suit pocket and touched the soft edges of her diagram, still warm from her glove. It was drawn by hand the night before, mapping the altitudes and ridgeline drift patterns she'd reviewed twice without anyone asking her to. The others had spent their downtime comparing approach speeds and burn rates. She'd stayed outside, tracking fog density on her own. Callie moved to the ready tent, where low folding tables held checklists and half-drunk coffee. A cluster of officers surrounded a heat lamp in the corner. Their words were clipped and fast, full of shorthand and acronyms, but none of it was new to her. She heard them talking about the final 2 rotations, the wind shifting south, the risk of inversion along the valley floor. One of them pointed toward the pad. "Who's that?" he asked. Another shrugged. "The new observer. Callie something." The group went quiet, then changed topics. No one greeted her. No one offered space at the table. She sat alone near the edge of the canvas wall. From where she rested, she could see the control tower blinking against the fog and the curved back of the Chinook she'd been assigned to. Its ramp was still open, cargo nets stacked with weighted training gear. Someone inside was checking the static lines with bare fingers. Callie watched, but not like a tourist. She tracked the patterns, the flow, the rhythm of readiness. Chief Rivas walked past her without stopping. His voice carried from the next table. "She's riding up front to observe. No flight duties. Just watch and stay out of the way." The words weren't cruel. They were simply policy. Callie adjusted the cuff of her flight gloves. They were worn and creased, the palms softened with use. Not new, not issued. Hers. They belonged to her the way the controls of the aircraft would. One day. Not yet. But soon. By nightfall, the sky had deepened to slate and the fog thickened. The lights on the pads glowed soft red and white. Shadows moved through the mist, mostly silent. Engines spun and cut. Comms flickered to life and went dead again. One pilot shouted an altitude correction from across the tent. Another called in a delay from the fuel line. Names were traded like markers on a board game. Callie's was never said. She didn't mind. She was still watching. When her Chinook began spinning up for the final exercise loop, she stood and followed the rest of the crew without being asked. She climbed aboard behind the crew chief, ducked under the side door, and strapped into the front jump seat behind the cockpit. No one turned to acknowledge her. She looked down at the diagram still tucked inside her suit, the ridgeline, the crosswind zone near the gap, the blind approach if the fog continued to thicken. She folded it again, placed it under her seat strap, and rested her gloved hands on her thighs. The flight hadn't begun, and no one expected her to contribute. That was fine. She had already memorized the whole route. She didn't need the seat. She only needed the sky. And soon enough, it would need her. By the second day of the exercise, the cold was no longer something the crews noticed. It was a fixture, like the hum of fuel pumps and the static in the headsets. The tempo had quickened. Aircraft turned faster. Debriefs ran shorter, and the instructors' voices grew sharper. The pads never stayed empty for long. Callie had flown 3 cycles by then, all in silence. Her assigned seat never changed, just behind the cockpit in the forward jump harness. No voice authorization, no flight commands, no access to nav updates. She rode with her hands clasped loosely over her gloves and her eyes locked forward. Her name wasn't on the log sheet for anything but OBSR. Chief Rivas barely acknowledged her. His crew, 2 enlisted flight techs and a gunner named Merritt, had settled into a rhythm that didn't include her. She was the extra strap. The empty seat filled to satisfy the rotation matrix. One of the crew called her the placeholder under his breath. The others laughed. She didn't turn. Briefings were held at the mission table inside the mobile ops bay. Pilots circled around the projection grid, exchanging speed settings and mock casual bravado. Each was given 5 minutes to adjust their LZ vector. Callie was given none. She sat on a folding bench at the edge of the tent, a half step behind the group, unseen by the software tracking IDs on their chests. When she raised her hand once quietly, palm open to suggest rather than insist, she was waved off by a junior controller with a clipboard. He didn't look up. "You're not flight rated for insertions. Hold questions for post-flight." She lowered her hand. No one used her name, even on the comms check. She was simply Observer 1. Her headset was cut from the main loop. Her channel fed only the aircraft's location ping and the cabin pressure readout. If something went wrong, she would hear it. But she would not be heard. At mealtime, there were 2 tables, one for the pilots and instructors, the other for auxiliary staff. Callie walked in late, tray in hand, and paused between them. No one looked up. A tech reached over her arm to grab a coffee lid and moved on. She sat alone at the far edge of the auxiliary bench. The wind crept in through the open tent flap, tugging at the paper receipt beneath her tray. She placed a fork over it to keep it still. She ate slowly. She listened. She remembered. On her way out, she passed the mission board again. A whiteboard, angled for visibility, marked with aircraft IDs and pilot and command assignments. The names were stacked, cleaned hourly, rewritten when updates came through. Her name wasn't there. Even Rivas's co-pilot was logged. She wasn't. She moved around the back of the fuel tent to check the weather telemetry station, an old habit. A screen blinked with wind vectors and thermal flux rates near the eastern range. She didn't need the readout. She already knew what it would say. The downdraft pattern was forming again near LZ9. The ridge took heat in the morning and released it slow at night. The fog would settle. No one had marked it yet. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the folded diagram. On the back side, in red ink, she drew the corrected path. 2 loops, one tighter than before. If the cloud bank settled, visibility would vanish just before the final turn. That night, she was reassigned to a different Chinook for a secondary observation slot. The crew chief gave her a once-over and nodded to the open ramp. "Your backseat only. Don't touch anything. Don't speak unless it's safety." She nodded once. The seatbelt was frayed but clean. The sound of the turbines rolling up was familiar, and she closed her eyes for just a second to track the shift in pitch from the back rotors. Her hands stayed on her lap. She didn't reach for the chart again. It was memorized. When they landed, another pilot made a passing comment while pulling off his gloves. She didn't even flinch. "Makes me nervous when they're that quiet." His friend replied without smiling. "Doesn't mean she knows what she's doing. Just means she's used to being ignored." Neither looked at her. She stepped off the aircraft last and waited at the far end of the line during post-flight checks. The debrief tent buzzed with talk of drift tolerances and how one aircraft skimmed the top of a comms tower on descent. The pilot who made the approach laughed it off. "Didn't feel that close to me." Callie didn't speak, but she'd seen the telemetry. She'd seen the crosswind too, and the route he chose would become impassable after nightfall. Her notes said so. Her lines said so. Nobody asked. She stood outside the tent for a moment longer than necessary. Fog moved between the pads in low, brushing curls. The Chinooks rested in shadow, cooling fast under the open sky. The last rotation was about to begin. She folded the updated diagram once, slid it back into her flight suit, and walked into the dark without being called. The operations tent was quieter than usual. Most of the training flights were complete, and the last crews were rolling through equipment logs. The chalkboard had been half erased. Someone had even pulled back the canvas on the fuel side wall to let the cold air clear out the haze. Final rotation was done. Debriefs were underway. The simulation had gone well. Then the radio cracked once, paused, and came to life again. A voice from Range Command cut through the idle chatter. Inject live. Final evac. East Ridge LZ degraded. Extraction team requesting pickup. No beacon. 10-minute window. At first, no one moved. One of the instructors looked up, then back at the terminal in front of him. That can't be real. They said no injects after 2100. The room shifted. Half the crew chiefs muttered about gear status. One of the navigators flipped through his checklist. Lips pressed tight. Another Chinook pilot stood, opened his mouth to volunteer, and then hesitated. My bird's cooked, overheating on the last set down. Callie watched from the corner, hands resting on her flight gloves. Her helmet was beside her boot. Her diagram sat folded in the side pocket of her suit, already marked. She didn't speak yet. The controller repeated the message. Inject confirmed. Final pickup. No auto-nav support. Grid line only. Chief Rivas looked over his shoulder. That's the worst possible LZ to run cold. He pulled off his headset. Who's up? No one answered. The silence thickened. Chairs creaked. Wind pushed at the tent wall. Someone coughed once. Then came the shuffle of boots, casual, almost imperceptible. Callie stepped forward. I can take it. The words weren't loud, but they cut across the tent like a blade. Every head turned. Some blinked, unsure who had spoken. A few narrowed their eyes in recognition. She stood calm, one hand briefly brushing the pocket where her diagram rested. I've reviewed the Eastern Ridge. Twice. I logged the downdraft offset and the fog pocket forming over the saddle. I know the turn. Merritt, the door gunner from her earlier crew, scoffed. You've never flown a full rotation. Callie nodded once. Correct. Rivas stepped forward, jaw tight. You're not even cleared for sim command. I don't need a full sim. I've flown this path in blackout twice already. I have the sequence. I can bring us in low under the fog band. The east saddle's still clear. It will close in 6 minutes. Someone near the map table muttered, She's guessing. Callie didn't move. No, she said. I've already seen it. Rivas watched her for a long second. His eyes weren't hostile, just hard. You think you can run this blind no beacon? Partial telemetry. Degraded LZ. Yes, she said. Her voice didn't change. I've done the math. I've drawn the ridge. I can hold it for 1 minute. If I'm wrong, you take the seat. More silence. Then the controller at the back cleared his throat. LZ is live. Clock is ticking. Rivas turned to Merritt, then to the others. Spin up the bird. He turned back to Callie and handed her the headset. His grip didn't shake, but his brow was furrowed. 1 minute in the seat, he said, You missed the turn. I take control. She took the headset. I won't miss it. Her helmet was in her hands now. She hadn't put it on yet, but her fingers rested on the edge like it was a key already cut. As the crew broke into motion, voices rose, half-spoken arguments, confusion, a few groans. Sharp was in the corner, arms crossed, watching without speaking. Callie moved through the line without needing to ask where to go. She ducked under the edge flap, walked through the thin mist rolling off the pad, and stepped into the aircraft ramp as it lowered. Her boots hit the steel like she had always belonged there. In the cockpit, the jump seat had been pulled. Rivas was strapping in beside her. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Callie settled into the pilot's chair and clipped her harness across her chest. The Chinook began to wake beneath her. One of the crew outside called the spin. Blades shifted with a shudder and then smoothed into rhythm. Inside the flight deck, the lights dimmed. The controls glowed under her hands, and the gauges rolled into motion. Some readouts blinked, warning standard for the inject. Fog outside crept higher. She slid her diagram into the side panel, though she wouldn't need it again. The flight wouldn't be long. Just one run, one saddle, one turn. Everything the others thought they knew was about to change. The Chinook rumbled beneath her as the rotors wound up into their full spin. The cockpit lights were low, throwing long shadows across the instrument panels. A faint green glow pulsed from the edge of the console, and the fog outside glimmered red under the pad lights. Callie sat still in the left seat, her harness already locked, fingers resting on the cyclic. She didn't need to rehearse. Every movement was known before it began. Behind her, the voices weren't loud, but they carried. "She's just watching," right, one of the crew whispered. "No, she's flying it. Rivas is backup. She's not flight cleared. She is now." The cabin fell quiet. Inside the cockpit, Chief Rivas made a few adjustments, his hands quick and exact. His eyes never fully left her. Callie reached for the collective and brought it up gently, just enough to test the aircraft's lift response. No delay. The engine sounded clean. One warning light blinked normal for a cold start under rapid sequence. She checked it, cleared it, and moved on. The nav screen beside her flickered twice and went dark. No map overlay, no digital terrain model. The system had gone into simulation blackout. She didn't react. Rivas leaned slightly toward her. "You sure about the path?" "Yes." That was all. He nodded once and looked forward. "Control, this is ridge rotation, spinning up and requesting green for final inject east ridge." The reply was immediate. Green confirmed, launch cleared, no nav assist. Callie's voice was calm. "Copy. Lifting now." She brought the collective up and nudged the cyclic forward. The Chinook rose off the pad with a low, shuddering growl. The rear wheels broke free of the concrete. Wind struck from the left, sudden and strong. The whole frame jolted sideways. There was a moment where the nose drifted. Then Callie adjusted. No panic, no overcorrection. She rolled her left wrist slightly, nudged the pedals, and held the turn steady with her fingertips. The wind caught the edge of the fuselage, slid across it, and moved on. The aircraft balanced. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. The voice in her headset was her own. "Drift 3 degrees north, holding saddle arc, ETA to ridge 2 minutes." The cloud layer thickened ahead. From the co-pilot seat, Rivas reached toward the dash, then stopped. He looked over at her hand on the controls, steady, unmoving. He let his hand fall away. The route ahead was black, the kind of dark that eats light. The only visible points were the red glow of her shoulder beacon and the faint shimmer of frost creeping across the edge of the window. Callie didn't flinch. She remembered the shape of the saddle. She remembered the pattern of the thermal current that would cross just before the last turn. She tracked the aircraft by vibration and timing, not by screen. The Chinook banked left, slight, controlled. Callie's voice came through again. Same tone. "Terrain bend in 5 seconds. Drop 2% collective. Holding angle." Rivas exhaled softly. The other voices in the cabin had gone completely still. The evac team on the ground couldn't be seen yet. Their beacon wasn't transmitting. If she missed the mark, there would be nothing but trees and wind and the shame of getting pulled mid-flight. But she didn't miss. Ahead, through a split in the fog, a flicker of motion. Callie brought the aircraft in lower. No words, no hesitation. She was flying the ridgeline blind, and every correction was perfect. From behind, the door gunner leaned forward in his harness, squinting through the open slit in the ramp. "She's on it," he said. "She's really on it." Callie lowered the collective again, and the aircraft dropped into the final curve. The cloud cover shifted above them, and the trees pulled open into a narrow plateau. A group of shapes waved their arms, tiny against the slope. Rivas didn't move. Callie flared the aircraft and brought the gear down clean. The wheels hit earth without bounce. The blades kept spinning. The evac team ran toward them, heads low. She reached up and toggled the ramp light. "Load in 30 seconds, she said, holding stable. The crew didn't answer right away. They were still watching her. Then Merritt called out, voice clipped and focused. "Team loading now. All clear." The ramp sealed. Rivas looked at her again. "You've got it." She nodded once. The Chinook lifted back into the dark, steady as a pulse. The Chinook powered forward through black air and shifting fog. Callie kept one hand on the cyclic, the other resting near the throttle, her thumb close to the trim release but never touching it. Her headset buzzed with faint static. The terrain below was a blur of shadows. Every contour swallowed in cloud. There was no beacon, no visual guide, only the beat of the rotors and the memory of the map she had drawn by hand. Behind her, no one spoke. The cabin light pulsed red. Chief Rivas monitored the console beside her, but his hands never moved to take over. He was watching, not doubting now, just watching. The jamming inject had taken out their lateral readings. Their GPS was cut to pulse intervals, so every correction came from feel. Callie adjusted course by listening to the slight rise in rotor pitch. She could tell when they slipped into a crosswind pocket just by how the engine note shifted half a key higher. When the nose lifted in turbulence, she countered with 2 fingers and brought it back. Below them, the ground sloped into uneven rock and windbreak trees. She didn't need to see it. She could hear the ridge coming. "Altitude steady," she said over the comms. "Dropping point in 15 seconds. The co-pilot screen flashed a warning. Velocity bleed too sharp. She tapped back on the cyclic and watched the numbers level. In the back, Merritt whispered something into his headset mic and then leaned forward. "She's flying it like she's done this for years." The other crewman didn't answer. His face was caught in the red glow of the interior lights. Wide-eyed, unmoving. Callie glanced once at the window. The edge of the fog had begun to glow faintly orange. Not daylight flare light. The evac team had heard them. She spoke again. "Flares at 12 o'clock. Visual confirmed. Approach locked." The Chinook banked gently, its heavy frame tilting through wind layers that would have rattled less confident hands. Callie kept the angle perfect, just beneath the fog line, just outside the gust funnel. They came into the plateau from the side, not head-on. It was the only way to counter the drift. The light from the flares reflected off her visor. A dozen figures waved from the slope, huddled near a marked rock face. One flare sputtered out, but the others burned high. Callie's voice didn't change. "Final descent. Hold tight." She dropped altitude 5 meters at a time. The rotor wash pressed down over the team below, throwing dust and branches. The wind cut sideways again, but she was already adjusting. Her hand on the cyclic barely moved. In the cabin, Merritt reached out, gripped the overhead bar, and didn't blink. "They're right below us." Callie tilted back slightly, flared the aircraft, and held it. The ground kissed the gear. The shock barely registered. "Ramp down, light green." Rivas looked at her once. It wasn't surprise anymore. It was something quieter. The evac team sprinted up the slope and hit the ramp full speed. Their boots clanged against the steel. One stumbled, caught by another, then shoved forward. "All aboard," Merritt shouted. "Ramp ceiling." Callie waited for the full lock confirmation. Locked. She lifted them fast. The Chinook rose out of the plateau with a clean vertical pull. The fog tried to close around them, but she angled into a known gap and slipped through. The return path was harder. The fog was denser now, and the wind more erratic, but she knew the route better in reverse. The terrain was carved into her already. Halfway back, a gust slammed the right side. The whole frame shuddered. One of the evac team grabbed the seat rail, eyes wide. Rivas reached for the throttle, but stopped when he saw her hand already compensating. "Countervector aligned," she said, stabilizing. The shudder stopped. The evac team sat frozen in place. Most had never seen the flight deck from behind. Now they couldn't look away. The hangar lights were visible before the pad itself, golden arcs through the fog, bright and high. The wind wasn't gone, but it was less aggressive now. Callie brought them in wide, circled once, and then dropped low for final approach. "Landing pad 5, she said, touching down in 12 seconds. She slowed perfectly. The wheels hit solid concrete. A pause, then silence. Ramp unlocked. The evac team filed out without speaking. One of them turned at the bottom of the ramp, looked back at her through the open bay, and mouthed the words, "Thank you." He didn't say them. He didn't have to. Callie powered down one system at a time. Rivas moved like he was waking from a long thought. In the cabin. Merritt finally let out the breath he'd been holding. She did it, he said, mostly to himself. She really did it. Outside, ground crews had already gathered, some expecting to meet the returning pilot. They didn't know it was her. She stepped out last, helmet under her arm, hair damp with sweat. Her boots hit the pad. The rotors spun slower now, ticking down. Lights flashed once, then went still. People were watching from the hangar, more than she expected. She kept walking. Inside the operations tent, the buzz of voices broke as soon as someone shouted, "They made it back!" Screens lit up again, names updated, rotations logged. Someone pointed at the board, confused. Who was the pilot? Another pointed toward the pad. Callie's name hadn't been written yet. Rivas followed her through the open flap, his hand still resting on the back of his helmet, his face unreadable. She flew it start to finish, he said aloud. Every correction, every drop. That was her. Silence. The crew chief at the console turned back to the main screen. The telemetry from her flight was still running. Perfect slope arc, clean descent profile, drift corrected by instinct, no overdraw on engine performance, time stamped at 21:58. 2 minutes before the cutoff. Merritt stepped in behind them. His voice, for once, wasn't mocking. Call sign. No one answered. The board stayed blank for now. But the screen didn't lie. She had done what no one else had even volunteered to try. And everyone knew it. The debrief room was packed wall to wall. Folding chairs scraped concrete. Thermal mugs steamed into the cold morning air, and the hum of the projectors filled the spaces between conversations. Most of the crews had stripped down to base layers or light jackets. Boots still dusted with frost. The large center screen was already lit, and the far wall ran 3 smaller feeds: helmet cam, flight telemetry, and LZ terrain overlay. Voices floated up from the back. That final inject was brutal. We didn't even get the call. Someone said it was Rivas's crew. Didn't think his bird was cleared. Callie sat on a low bench along the far edge of the tent, half in shadow. Her helmet rested beside her, visor down. She didn't touch it. She didn't speak. She watched the screen as the previous rotation wrapped up, grainy footage of a textbook Evac fading into black. Up front, Lieutenant Sharp stood with arms crossed, flight notes tucked under one arm. He didn't look at her. He didn't glance at the bench. His focus was on the instructors seated near the control table, waiting for final confirmation. Last rotation, said the controller. Inject extract East Ridge. The room didn't go quiet yet. A few people still whispered, assuming it would be a partial run. Sharp stepped forward. This one's a little different. No pre-brief, no ground beacon. Partial nav blackout. We had one shot to reach them. Someone in the front row leaned sideways and asked, "Who flew it?" Sharp didn't answer. Instead, he nodded to the operator beside the console. The main screen cut to black, then lit with helmet cam feed. No music, no intro, just the silent roll of motion. The footage opened with low-altitude navigation, the Chinook slipping beneath the cloud band. The fog glowed in sharp red pulses as the internal lights cycled. The only sound was the faint hum of her breath, steady and unbroken. In the corner window, flight telemetry ran in real time. Altitude drops in perfect segments, wind speed matched with minute collective adjustments, drift corrections logged within margin, timestamps ticked cleanly. From the back, someone exhaled. That's not SimNav. She's flying it by hand. A few heads turned. No one looked at Callie. On the screen, the footage followed the final arc toward the ridgeline. One flare burst into view. Her visor glinted briefly as the aircraft dipped low and flared. Timing exact. The Chinook hovered, dropped, touched down with no bounce. In the second feed window, the LZ overlay drew itself in real time. The path she took was the only one clear of wind shear. The thermal drift was mapped post factum by command review, but she had flown it in advance. There was no margin for guesswork. Her curve matched it 100.0%. A quiet voice near the front said, "She saw it before the model did." On the video, the Evac team loaded in. One staggered, caught by another. The ramp sealed. The Chinook lifted, caught one crosswind slam, and held. Callie's voice cut through the headset feed. Counter-vector aligned, stabilizing. The room didn't speak. The return was faster, cleaner. The final rotation timestamp hit 21:58. 2 minutes inside the window, the footage ended. Silence. Sharp still hadn't moved. Rivas stepped forward from the sidewall. His jacket was still zipped, helmet strap tucked into the collar. He looked at the instructors, then at the board. He didn't raise his voice. Pilot in command Callie, score 100.0. A murmur broke, but no one laughed. No one challenged it. Sharp dropped his flight notes. They hit the floor without a sound. The operator at the console looked at the mission board, where the pilot column still showed blank. He reached for the dry marker and wrote the name. No rank, no call sign. Just Callie. The evac team filed in from the side entrance, still wind-burned, still in gear. One of them pointed at the screen, then at her. He said something under his breath and nodded. The others followed. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They stood there watching her, like people who'd seen something they didn't expect to remember forever. Callie didn't move. She sat with hands folded, helmet beside her, expression unchanged. The instructors gathered near the console began whispering. One of them looked at the telemetry sheet, then back at the replay. She flew it off visual memory. No nav, no assist. That pattern wasn't even uploaded. Sharp finally turned toward her. His face wasn't hard. It wasn't soft, either. He looked at her like someone seeing a shadow they couldn't make disappear. She wasn't cleared, he said flatly. Rivas didn't turn. She is now. The score remained on the screen. The telemetry ran again in the corner, looped automatically by the feed software. 100.0. Merritt stepped inside the tent last, ducking under the flap and pausing near the coffee table. He looked at the board, then at Callie, and gave a half nod. Not mocking this time. Just quiet. He joined the wall without saying a word. Callie stood. She picked up her helmet, adjusted the strap, and stepped past the rows without looking for permission. Nobody stopped her. Outside, the fog had started to lift. The sky was pale when she returned to the pad. The fog had thinned to low trails curling around the edge of the concrete, and the lights from the hangars had gone soft in the rising light. The Chinook sat where it had landed hours earlier, steam still rising faintly from the rotor housing. Callie walked toward it in silence, gloves tucked under one arm, a rag in her hand. She didn't move quickly. She didn't need to. There were no cameras now, no debriefs, no line of instructors at the tent flap waiting to log scores. She wasn't in the logbook anymore. She was above it now. She reached the nose of the aircraft and ran her hand lightly across the panel, wiping away the fine layer of dust the fog had left behind. Her fingers paused at the edge of the engine intake, then dropped to the rivets along the door frame. She had memorized every piece of it long before she flew it. The ritual grounded her. Behind her, a pair of boots crunched gravel. She didn't turn. You really flew it blind. The voice was younger, a junior pilot, maybe 1 or 2 rotations into his certs. She didn't answer. He stopped a few paces behind her, watching the steam rise from the rotor. They're calling you Ridgehawk, he said. It's everywhere. She smiled, but only faintly, and didn't look back. I'm just here to fly. He nodded and moved on, hands in his pockets, jacket flapping in the breeze. She listened to his footsteps fade, and then returned to her work. She checked the straps on the ramp harness, wiped down the edge of the console glass, and gently pressed her palm to the side of the fuselage. The metal was warm, not hot anymore, just warm. A soft beep echoed from inside the tent where the servers ran flight logs and playback feeds. Inside the command trailer, someone clicked through encrypted channels, selecting replay segments for internal review. One window opened with helmet cam footage. It was her view. Fog rolling, altitude steady, breath calm. She didn't speak much in the recording. She didn't need to. The controls were steady in her hands, the machine an extension of focus and instinct. On the overlay, her flight path glowed in clean lines, perfectly matching the delayed satellite feed. The screen held on the frame where she dropped into the ridge and hovered. Text appeared at the bottom. Final rotation. She wasn't even scheduled to fly. The clip passed through a dozen inboxes in the next hour. It wouldn't go viral. It wouldn't be published, but it would be remembered. Back on the pad, Callie walked the length of the tail rotor and stopped. She looked at the steel still ticking with heat and placed her gloved hand gently across the center strut. She stayed there a moment, not thinking, not posing, just present. The wind rolled past her boots and moved on. Her reflection flickered in the cockpit glass, blurred by the rising sun. And then she turned and walked away, quiet as always, with nothing left to prove. She never asked for a seat. She never raised her voice. And when the moment finally came, she didn't prove anyone wrong with anger or pride. She just flew. In a world where recognition is often loud and fleeting, Callie's journey reminds us that real strength doesn't need an audience. It's built in quiet preparation, sharpened through patience, and revealed when no one expects it. Her story is about more than flight. It's about self-worth, earned in silence, the dignity of being overlooked yet unshaken, and the calm certainty that speaks when others fall quiet. If you've ever felt underestimated or unseen, this story is for you. Let it be a reminder that your moment is coming, and when it does, let your work speak. We'd love to hear what part of Callie's journey resonated with you. Share your thoughts below, and follow for more quiet, powerful stories like this one.